Hi, welcome to the Busy Corner. This is lesson 24. I want to make a correction concerning the video you were about to see. I'm going to show you today a new stitch. It's called knitting through the back loop, and it creates this almost braid on the surface of your piece. And the first time I show the stitch, I tell you to twist the stitch counterclockwise. That's not correct. It's a clockwise motion. So when you make this stitch, and you'll see it many times in the video, and whether you're on the right or the left pipe, it doesn't matter. When you take the stitch off before you knit it, you will be rotating the stitch clockwise and knitting it. Just like that. And whether you're going from the right or the left pipe, the motion is the same. So take the stitch off, and if you have it in your right hand, you can just twist it clockwise, like so. And let's assume that you are actually coming from the right pipe. You might have to use both hands depending on your dexterity. When you take the stitch off, it'll look like this. You might need two hands to help you rotate that stitch clockwise. So that piece of yarn of the stitch crosses over like that before you knit it. And that's how to KTBL. Hi, welcome back to the Busy Corner. This is lesson 24. Today I'm going to show you how to make this shoulder wrap. This is another Lion Brand pattern. I'm going to turn around so you can see how the back of this looks. I did it a little differently than the pattern because I knit it on a slightly larger needle. Let me show you what the picture looks like in the pattern. And it is this. It is written for thick and quick, and is a cabled scarf and hat. And you can see that on her version it looks a little tighter. But when I tried that, I didn't really care for it. But I've already cast on the 36 stitches, so let's get started. Okay, so this is Lion Brand pattern 60619A. And as I said, when I first started knitting this, I was using the smallest rods. Those are the ones that are the 3/8 inch dowel rods, equivalent to US 15. I didn't care for it. It was too tight, and even if you don't do your gauge swatch, you'll know it's too tight by how the fabric feels. If it doesn't have a lot of flexibility to it and feels stiff, then you know you're knitting it too tightly. On knitting needles, this is a US 15 knitting needle. This is how it was coming out. And that looked pretty nice to me. I could see, though, that if I wasn't careful, I might get some puckering on the edge. So I went ahead and went up to the 3/8 inch PEX tubing, which is equivalent to the US 17 needle. And I like how this feels. It's a little softer and it's not so rigid. So, you could try it on the smaller needles. Just make sure, the smaller rods, just make sure you're not pulling your stitch too tight. I think I have a tendency to pull pretty tightly. So this uses 3 skeins, just about. This is all I have left of my third skein. Oh shoot, can you pan out a little bit? Well, here, you can probably show up this way. The one thing I forgot to show you, I was standing up, you're going to seam this in 2 places. This is essentially a rectangle that should measure when you're finished about 14 inches by 50 inches. And the rectangle edges cross, and I should have showed that, but what I did to sew this seam was take those loops on the inside and sew those together. Be careful when you're going to have 3 new skeins as you're weaving this, and you're going to need to weave those ends in. Don't put them too close to the edge. I almost had one of my knots show because I had it too close to the edge of this. When I wove it in, I wasn't thinking. So you can see that these are just crossed on both ends, and that's what you'll seam up. So anyway, the whole thing took me 6 hours to complete, and that included seaming it. And there's a couple quirks to this pattern, which is why I went ahead and made this video today. One is that when you get your pattern, you are going to see, and again, this is written for straight needles. They suggest a size 15. I thought it looked too tight, and that's why I used the bigger size. But we're all going to knit a little differently, I think. And you will need a cable needle like this. And you will need 3 skeins of Woolies yarn. And you'll notice that I cast my stitches on already. You cast on 36 stitches, but I cast them onto this left pipe. And the reason for that is the pattern actually begins on the wrong side of the piece. If you read your directions, you're going to see for the wrap, make sure you don't mix it up with the hat because the hat is on the same pattern here. But the wrap says cast on 36 stitches, then purl 1 row. Well, that told me that my main pattern, beginning with row 1 for the cable, which is 8 rows wide, was going to begin on my right pipe. So I went ahead and cast on to this side because it said purl 1 row. And that's another indicator that they're often asking you to start on the wrong side. And you can even see where it says rows 1, 3, and 7 are your right side of your work. So, in this case, you will cast on to the left side. And you'll go ahead, not purling, obviously, that row, because that's the row we switch. So you're still going to reverse the stitches on your left pipe, and we are going to make those knit stitches. Have a piece of cardboard or whatever to mark your rows. You're going to be going back and forth between these directions and these directions and kind of jumping back and forth. So it helps to mark that off or rewrite it on a piece of paper. This is row. I'm not even going to use my stitch counter yet because this is just a beginning edge piece of this. So go ahead and make these as front stitches. And you will front stitch the whole row because the directions say to purl. So we're still going to treat this left pipe as the one we reverse the stitches on. The other reason I wanted to show you this pattern is it involves a new stitch that you have not seen before. And none of my beginning knitting books actually have this stitch in it. One of my books that's called Essentials of Knitting does. So you'll often find in some of these beginning patterns, or they're called easy patterns, but you can find that information online, I think, too, if you just put in the abbreviation, which you'll see on your pattern is TBL, and it's called Through the Back Loop. So all we're putting on now is a foundation row, basically, and then we'll begin our cable pattern. This is a very warm wrap. I like it, and I like the way I knitted it, but you wouldn't have to do it this way. If you want it tighter and you don't want it to be as wide or as drapey looking, I was kind of thinking this would make a really nice bed jacket. Because often we sit and read in bed. Sometimes I even knit. And I get cold. It'll be a nice winter bed jacket and make a nice gift. Okay, I guess I could have done these before we started the video, but that's alright. So like I said, 90% of the time, you're going to be starting your patterns on this right-hand pipe. But in this case, no. So you always have to read through your directions and see, is there a stitch you're not familiar with or a way to set it up. This is a color called Fisherman, I believe. Thick and quick. Alright, now you're ready to begin your pattern. And it says row 1, work row 1 of the cable pattern to the last 10 stitches. And row 1 of our cable, or row 1 of the cable pattern, says purl 2, which is exactly what we're going to do. So we're going to back stitch 2. Remember, this isn't the side you reverse. Then it says knit 6, K6, so we're going to front stitch 6. Now, when you start working patterns like this, it is very easy to lose track of where you're at. Let me show you something. 2, 4. Alright, now it says purl 2. Just remember that you can always look on the side of your rod here. I don't know if that's going to show up. Let me turn it. So, I did those first two as back stitches. I did these as knit stitches or front stitches. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2. So if you're not sure how many you knit, just look at the side of your stitch quickly, the side of your pipe, and that'll tell you what you did on those stitches if you've lost count. It's very easy to have that happen. Okay, so now you've done the purl 2. Now we have our new stitch, and it's called KTBL. That's the abbreviation, and that means through the back loop. Now, when that happens, the physics of it is that when the yarn comes through the loop in another way, that's the loop of knitting, that if you were doing this on knitting needles, you would actually be taking the knitting needle through there and grabbing the yarn, wrapping the yarn around the needle and pulling it back through. And what happens when you do that is that it twists this stitch, not the new stitch, but the stitch you previously made as you pull that yarn through. So what we're going to do when we take our stitch off as we knit it, we're going to twist it first, and we're going to. So here is a normal looking stitch. Here it is coming off the pipe. And normally if you did a front stitch, you would just come underneath and knit that, but we're not going to. We're going to twist it counterclockwise so that it looks like this. And then put the yarn underneath and knit it as usual. Now we're going to purl 1. Now there's another KTBL. So take your stitch off. It looks like this. Twist it so it looks like that. Now knit it as usual underneath. Okay, now we do that again, and you can see from your instructions there's a little, it says REP from, and there's a little asterisk sign. So it means it wants us to do that again. And so that's what we're going to do. So now we purl 2. Because you can see that the other asterisk sign is all the way at the beginning of the instruction. So there's another. Now we knit 6. Now we purl 2, back stitch 2, and now we do another KTBL through the back loop. So there's the stitch, twist it clockwise. Purl 1, through the back loop, and now we go down to the other part of the pattern where it says rows 1, 3, 7, right side. Now these are our last 10 stitches. You can always double check. So we have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 stitches on here. Now our pattern reads purl 2, P2, knit 6, and now we purl 2 again. Alright, now let's go ahead and do row 2. So we click our clicker. Whoops, I forgot to do it the first time. So now this is row 2, and you can see that this time, before we go up to work the cable pattern, we're going to knit 2, but we're not, because the directions say K2, P6, K2. This is the side we reverse. So I'm going to purl 2 instead of knitting. Now it says purl 6, but I'm going to knit 6. I already lost count because I'm thinking ahead. 5, 6, and now we purl 2. Okay, now it says go up to the top part of that cable pattern. You'll see an asterisk and it says P TBL. So it wants us to purl through the back loop. But we're not going to do that. We're going to knit through the back loop again. So take your stitch off. It looks like that. Twist it clockwise. Knit it. Now we're going to, it says K1, but we have to purl 1. And for some reason, this is the stitch. I messed up a couple times. I actually knitted it when I should have purled it. I think because it said P on the previous ones. Now it says P TBL, but we're going to knit it. We twist it and knit it rather than purl it. You're going to have to do that to the whole row. Now it says K2, so we purl 2. There's 1. There's 2. And now we knit 6 because it says to purl 6. And now we purl 2. Make sure when you're working your pattern, particularly for your cable pattern, that you've pulled off enough yarn so it's loose. Okay, now we do that one more time because it has the asterisk there. We have to repeat from the asterisk. So now they want us to purl TBL, but we're going to knit it, twist it clockwise, and knit it. That'll make your hole a little bit smaller, just don't let go of it. And if you make a mistake and have to back up, don't forget, in fact I'm going to show you that. So we take another one off because now it says P TBL. We're going to knit it. And we're going to purl 2. But we're just going to purl 1. Now let's say I made a mistake and I say, oh, did I knit that stitch or did I purl that stitch? Did I make a mistake there? It's hard to tell on there, those TBLs. When you back up, and you need to undo something, particularly if it's a pattern and it's somewhat complicated, do 1 stitch at a time. I know if I pull that this stitch has to come and go right back up there. Okay, now watch. This was at TBL, so when I pull the yarn out, I have to make sure when I repipe it that I untwist it and stick it back up there. You can go back as far as you want to, but it has to be 1 at a time, and always, if it has been one that you twisted, untwist it first. Now, there we are, and I say, oh gosh, where was I in the pattern? I don't even remember now. Count from the end. So I know that my last 2 stitches are going to be purl stitches. Then I need 6 stitches to knit. 2, 4, 6. Then I need 2 stitches to purl. So this one has to be a purl 1. And then this one is the one I have to twist, the TBL stitch. Now I should have 10 left. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. And now I purl my 2. And I knit 6. And now I purl 2. And you want to continue with that pattern until row 5, and I'll show you how to do the cable for row 5. Okay, we're going to begin row 5, and we're going to do the cable 3 times on row 5. But before we do, I just wanted to point out on the piece I'm wearing, you'll see that there are 3 cables, 1, 2, 3. And then these rows that almost look like a surface braid, here and here, they're 2 groups, those are your TBL stitches. So it should look like that when you make it. Anyway, let's do row 5. I forgot to point that out earlier. So on the wrap instructions it says, work row 5 of cable pattern to the last 10 stitches. So now we have to go back up to the top where it says cable pattern, row 5. And first they want us to purl 2, so we will back stitch 2, And now it says 3/3, and that's a 3/3 left cross. Since these stitches are smaller and you only have one strand, this is a good time to get out a cable needle, which looks like this. And you're going to take 3 of these stitches off. So it's 1, 2, 3. And you're going to move them to the front. In our case, that means moving them forward. And I think it's helpful to take the point of the cable needle and just stick it under one of these loops. A couple stitches back, not under the first 3 because you're going to be knitting those, and that helps hold that still and make sure that those won't get dropped off there. Now go ahead and push your knitting a little farther to the forward. So now you have your 3 stitches on here. This is under the edge of this. You know, don't stab your yarn, go under your yarn. Now just hold it in position and you knit 3, and they should look like this as you're taking them off and knitting them. So there's your 3. Now you knit 3 from the cable needle. So you can either put them back like we did on the last video, or since this is easier to work with when you're smaller and you only have the 1 strands, go ahead and take one off at a time. You're going to start on the left hand side, remove the stitch, and you're going to have to use a little oomph to bring it forward. Make sure you don't lose your other stitches in the process. And when you do, it should look like this. You can almost picture a waterfall of stockinette stitches coming over this edge. You'll be able to see that as we go along here. So there's one. Now take off the next one. Leave the other one up there. Again, you're going to have to pull it forward a bit. Knit it. And now the last one. And as you bring it forward, you'll be able to see almost that column of stockinette stitches below it. That's how it should look. And knit that. And that's your first cable of the row. Then the next instruction says to P2, which is purl 2. Now we have another KTBL. So off comes the stitch. You can do it however you want to, but if you take it off this way, you almost need 2 hands then to rotate it. So it's just crossed over like this. I guess that would be clockwise. That's how we're doing it. And then purl 1. Now we do another through the back loop. Alright, now we repeat from the asterisk, so that means we do another purl 2. Go back to the beginning of this instruction for row 5. So there's our 2. Now we do a 3/3 cross. So take off your 3 stitches, put them on your cable needle, take them to the front, pin them if you will, if you want to, underneath that. Knit 3. Take off the first stitch of the cable, knit it. Take off the second stitch of the cable and knit it. And the last stitch of the cable and knit it. Then we purl 2. Through the back loop. Purl 1. Through the back loop. Now we go down to the bottom where it says work row 5 of cable pattern to the last 10 stitches. So we should have 10 left, and we have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. We're going to purl the first 2. And we do our last cable. So take off 3 stitches, move them to the front, knit 3, watch your yarn, make sure you got some slack. Take your first stitch from the left, knit it, pipe it, take your middle stitch, and now we take the last stitch, bring it forward, knit it, and purl 2. And then you will continue in the rest of your pattern. I did, for my piece, and when you measure it, it should be 50 inches long if you're about a medium. I would say I'm a medium. So if you're a larger person or a smaller person, you might want, maybe you don't need it to be 50 inches, but you need that much for them to cross over. I did 14 repeats plus 2 rows to make mine 50 inches long. And when you measure it, don't measure it as it's hanging. Lay it out flat, unstretched, and that will give you your 50 inches. And then sew up the edge and you're good to go. Thanks for watching.